correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, a podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience.
Welcome back to Me and Steve Talk RPGs. I'm here with my friend Steve.
Hello.
And we're going to talk some RPGs. But before we get into that, we have a podcast for the week we want to shout out.
Yep. This week on the D20 Network, we're going to talk about the Court Games. Well, I call it the Court Games family of podcasts because there's like three of them.
Right.
There's the one that's called Court Games. There's one called Fortune and Strife, and there's one called Crimson Gold Agonies.
Correct. All
All of them center around Legend of the Five Rings in various forms, iterations, etc., be it lore, cards, RPGs, whatever. Crimson Gold Agonies and Fortune and Strife are both actual plays, and I believe it's Crimson Gold Agonies is done much more in the style of an audio drama, but Fortune and Strife is a little more of a, what do you want to say? You get some of the dice rolls, some table talk, that kind of things, and if I saw the last post they put up on the D20 Network Discord right, they're actually doing some stuff with the Adventures in Rokugan book that Edge put out that is the 5e D&D adaptation of the setting.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Cool stuff happening over there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you actually came up with the topic, well, sort of based on the conversation we had on the Discord for tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you go ahead and give us a little rundown?
Well, so Brett was asking us to talk about, the 5 or 10 games in our stack that we really want to get to play and haven't yet. And that kind of got me thinking a little bit about, like, what's your dream game?
Mm-hmm.
And so I just thought we could kind of go from there.
Well, I'll answer Brett's question because I've thought about that a good bit recently. The 5 games in my stack that I haven't got to play yet, in no particular order, is Slay Industries 2nd edition, Twilight 2000, the newest edition. I've been wanting to play Tales from the Loop for a long time. Haven't gotten it actually on a table. We, I think, played one session.
I think we did a session 0.
Yeah, we did session 0. I don't want to run it, but I would love to have somebody run me the Dresden Files RPG. I have a copy of it, and I just want to play that. And then Cold Cities. It's been on my radar. It's been in my thing. I just haven't gotten a chance to really read over it and play it yet. And I know it's a really cool system, but just haven't gotten that chance yet.
There's a lot of crossover. I would like to do something with Slay. I'm really intrigued with the setting, curious about the system. Twilight 2000, Cold City keeps creeping back into my mind just because I love that kind of that era history, the post-Nazi,
that Cold War era, man. Yeah, that Cold War era,
especially early Cold War like that.
Yeah.
I really would love to do something with Savage Worlds, probably Savage Rifts specifically.
Mm-hmm. Savage Rifts would be fun.
And boy, I've got this gnawing in the back of my head idea that I really want to try something with Night's Black Agents.
Mm.
If we're going, in systems I don't really have experience with, that's where I think I'm at, probably. I think that was 5. I don't know if that was 5 or not.
Yeah, I'm sure. Probably close to 5.
It was 5-ish. But I think I almost find it kind of more fast. That got me thinking though. What is that dream game that I want to either run or play in? And I don't know that they're different.
You
know what I mean? Like in some ways, yes, but I think the elements.
my short list, or my want to play short list, and my dream game are very different.
Fair.
My dream game, my desert island game that I would be in hog heaven if I could just play this for the rest of eternity, would be a long form game of Cyberpunk 2020 run by somebody else. I'm good at it. I can do it. I'm sure I would have a fine time doing it. Recently, I have been wanting to play other systems. I've just been wanting to play stuff. And I think part of that comes down to I've had a consistent game for the past almost a year at this point, and I'm ready to be a player again. I can never do the forever GM stuff. I just can't. I can do it for a while, and then I get to this point where I look at other stuff and I'm like, I want to play something else.
Yeah, see, I like GMing. I unfortunately just haven't been able to get anything to stick for me in a while in terms of, with just scheduling and everything else. But
Yeah.
I think of it when I think about Dream Game, I think more in terms of the elements I want in the game and not necessarily the system.
Okay.
And I'm not by in any way saying, the way you think of it isn't right or valid or anything like that. Just, when I think about it, I'm thinking, I would like like pretty heavy on intrigue, but also lots of action. Like, and I think maybe some of that is, in my teens and 20s, I read an absolute crap ton of Tom Clancy.
Right.
And I mean, formulaic, yes, in a way, but still were some pretty entertaining stories.
I mean, it's Clancy. He was considered a prolific author for a reason.
Yeah.
It's not because you could get a copy of any of his books at any airport. It was more so that there are a handful of his books that are just phenomenal.
Oh, I mean,
or even better than a handful. Look at all the stuff that's based off of it. Seriously.
I still say, and I think, and I'd have to look up exactly what order he wrote them in, but Hunt for Red October is just, and I mean, even the film adaptation, which is, in my mind, one of the better book to film adaptations I've ever seen. It's just like, it's kind of this combination of, boy, it's just so crazy that I'll try it, And I've heard, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I've heard that when they actually were initially talking to Sean Connery to take the role of Marco Ramius, that when they faxed him the script, he initially turned them down because the fiction disclaimer didn't come through, and he thought it was at least somewhat based in reality. He didn't want
he didn't want to be part of that.
It was semi-documentary.
Yeah.
So I mean, and like I said, I think intrigue and action, and I say action as opposed to combat, because combat, I think, for me, can flip me into that hyper tactical, full on math brain mode, where action is like, I get the kind of the same rush, but I don't necessarily go math mode. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel that. See, that's why my Cyberpunk is just the go-to for me, because any kind of story told in Cyberpunk, I'm there for. You tell me you tell me to make some kind of thief character, I make a thief character, and we do we
heisty
stuff. You tell me that I'm a hit squad, okay, I'm gonna be a hit squad. That's why I'm always down for Cyberpunk things, because everything in that genre fits in my wheelhouse of things I'm entertained in. And also my brain fills in those gaps. So just a tangent, this is why I don't get into fantasy so much, is because my brain is not wired in a way that I fill in fantasy gaps, right? So if you tell me to describe a tavern, I'm going to describe the most basic tavern I've ever seen. I'm going to describe something that looks like it came out of the Lord of the Rings movie. If you tell me to describe a cityscape in a cyberpunk future, or to describe a bar at a cyberpunk, setting, I can give you detailed and in-depth descriptions of what this room looks like. Is it packed? Is it dead? Is it smoke-filled? Is it not? Is the music loud? That all clicks in my brain in the right way. Whereas a fantasy setting, I have to be like, well, there's live music because we don't have anything that plays music. Well, there is a bartender and they're this, and it's I can't. I have to actively put effort in. Meanwhile, if you tell me just fill in the blanks on X, I can do that.
No, I think, yeah. Well, I feel that's where I tend more towards pseudo modern settings. Let's call it that, or sci-fi, but stuff based, a little more around the reality that we live, as opposed to, like you said, like the Lord of the Rings or whatever. But yeah, and I just, like I said though, I find it interesting that you went, oh, I want this system, and for as much as I'm in a way a system junkie, I didn't go there. But the other thing that I've noticed that I have a fascination with, and this kind of occurred to me because it was recently Shark Week for Discovery and their apps and all that, and so I don't know. I got into watching deep sea ocean stuff and realized how much I'm fascinated by things that not a lot is known about.
Look, all I'm saying is if you say you're taking a submarine trip, I'm going to tell you that the podcast is over and I'll find a new host. That's all I'm saying. No Steve submarine trips. How about that?
No, I'm not saying if I was offered a trip in a legit actual submarine, like not like
oh
this
yeah,
experimental
no,
thing.
If you're offered a trip in a legit submarine, then that's a different conversation. But if you're offered a trip to go to see the Titanic and it's I don't know, made out of carbon fiber and run by a PlayStation controller, maybe don't. Maybe don't. And I'm not making light of any sort of, I'm not going to be that guy and make light out of people's loss, but like, I don't know, for me, common sense kicks in at some point and I go, I don't need to see it that bad.
Well, I'm reminded of something that a guy that used to be kind of known as the crabby old Brit around one of the old motorcycle forums I used to hang out with a lot. He was, again, like I said, kind of known as the crabby old Brit, but he used to have a saying, and it was something along the lines of, there's nothing wrong with thinking outside the box as long as that box doesn't have sound engineering written on the outside of it. and once you got to know him, it actually made all the sense in the world because, just him living in the UK and having to meet the standards that they have to over there, he didn't do some of the, shall we say, more experimental stuff that you would see people on this side of the ocean doing, for the reason being that, yeah, he'd seen people try it and it didn't pass the standards that their stuff had to pass. But that's a little bit of a digression, I think. But I meant more like in the context of like, and sometimes I'll put stuff on that theoretically, yes, I'm watching it, but it's more of a background noise thing that I'm listening to. Stuff about, some of the, lost shipwrecks and just, but to me, it's fascinating things that we don't understand or we only partially understand. And I think that for me is also an attraction for gaming because there can be so much there where it is a strange new world, so to speak. But that's a weird line to get into because, that also, how you can't just do that over and over again. And then how do you create a character in a game that where you know nothing about the world, or how does your character not know things about the world? You know what I mean?
Right.
So that puts me in 6 places at once that don't overlap, and that confuses me. Speaking of another game that I have that I'm very curious about, Frag 2E just showed up like last week or 2
Oh
weeks
yeah,
ago.
that looks awesome. That looks awesome.
Oh, the books are gorgeous.
Yeah, that's the thing I'll say about all of those Frag games is, man, they got an artist and they know what they're doing because that shit's great. Just is.
And and they're in, Wade Dyer, the main author there, has a theory about world building, and I don't want to horribly misquote it, but it's like for him it's a third familiar, a third unusual, and a third new, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I retweeted a tweet he put up about it on our Twitter, I don't know, a week or two ago. But he has this basically theory of thirds in world building where a third of it is, so to speak, comfortable, familiar structure. A third of it is, well, kind of new, but something you kind of know about, and the third of it is new stuff. And yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting theory, and I think I tried to talk to him about that when we had him on way back, but I don't remember us getting a long way with it.
Yeah, I don't remember a lot coming out of that, but
so
you know.
that to me is an element for a, so to speak, a dream game too, is some of that exploration and discovery, which
Yeah.
probably is why part of me really wants to, and not that I wouldn't run it, but part of me really does want to play in like a pretty big epic Star Wars game. And that could be pretty much any system. I mean, the FFG system, Edge, whatever, is great, and I love it, but it I think for me it's more about the things I'm experiencing than the system itself. Is that
Right.
like, I know that seems kind of weird in a context where experiencing is hearing other people say things, not actually having a traditional experience. Let's put it that way. But yeah, I don't know. Like, and the funny thing is like I hear myself say that, and none of that seems that far out of reach, but it seems that it's incredibly difficult to put together at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yes, it is incredibly difficult to get everything in order.
And like, and I guess too, the other thing is, and I can say this, I think with a fair amount of certainty, I say I want, action, whatever, and yet, most the Tom Clancy books, for the first half of the book, it's all set up. Then yeah, stuff does start happening, and I think he was particularly good at simultaneous ramping, which I'm sure is a whole lot easier to do in print than it would be in running an RPG campaign. But you know what I mean? Like he would have all these different segments of his plot that were gradually coming together, all kind of ramping up, evenly. And I don't know. It's a goal, right?
Yeah, no, I think it's I don't know. It's really interesting. And I would love to, yeah, that's another game that's on the short list is Fragged Empire 2nd Edition. Man, that game's so freaking cool.
Oh, it's pretty. It's so pretty.
It really is.
I need to read the system because he describes it as medium crunch, but talking with him about it, it feels like it's on a similar level to, I'm just going to say generically D&D.
Yeah, but we described that as like medium crunch.
Yeah, well, that's how I remember Wade specifically describing it as medium crunch.
Yeah, so if it's on par with D&D, I would say then it probably is medium crunch.
It probably, if I remember again, because I've been looking at the lore book, not so much the system book, but I believe it effectively works a lot like D&D as far as roll plus bonuses trying to beat target number, except it uses 3d6 instead of a d20. But that is me going off of memory of an interview from a long time ago, and not the book sitting 3 feet to my left.
Right. Right.
Hey, and then I guess I wonder too, does that affect me as to how I want to GM things? If I'm looking for that discovery, how do I do that as a GM? Because as a GM, don't I need to know kind of what's being discovered?
Nah. That's not necessary. Coming from somebody who flies absolutely by the seat of my pants. Nah. Man, there's been so many wild discoveries in my games that people have been like, "Oh, that's awesome." And I'm like, "Great. I'm glad you really like that." I had no clue. No clue what was going on until you guys got there.
I mean, I was listening to a podcast today, and I won't bother to say which one because, it's one I've mentioned a lot. But the two individuals that run said podcast were talking about setting elements, and if they're defined or if they're intentionally left unknown, and kind of saying that, well, if you this, and if you that, and you better blah blah blah, which had me thinking about how the morning is defined in Eberron. Because Eberron is another. I mean,
yeah, that's a game. That's a game, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but talking about the morning and how it's described is kind of funny because everything else in that game is very highly, highly, highly detailed, much
Mhm.
like a noir novel would be. And the morning is like, I don't know, something happened. Something in the desert happened. We don't talk about that.
But it's intentionally been left undefined.
Right. Right. It's so that the GM, can go, I'll play with the morning a little bit.
Right, and that's like, yeah, it I guess in a way, maybe that's a discovery element, 'cause Eberron is a setting that, again, I could really get some, but Eberron is weird, and there's so many different angles to it, like, just the way different things are handled because, I mean, we've both heard Keith talk about it a lot and whatnot, and so much of it was done as, well, what if we did this, and then what would that make happen over here, and what would that make happen over here, and so on and so forth.
Right.
And whereas, like, it feels like what initially looks like a haphazard stack of bowling pins that you realize is all actually very carefully placed. That makes sense?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's the dominoes. At a glance, dominoes look like they're just sort of set around, but as you start looking into them deeper, you notice that they're actually set up in a pattern.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it's dominoes.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know, and look, I'll be honest, half the reason I figured we could talk about this topic too, as far as dream games and so forth, is, look, if you're on our Discord, tell us what you would have as a dream game, and we can all hash stuff out and talk about whatever, and
Right.
or, come join the Discord. We get into some interesting conversations. Today, there's a little bit of talk about Werewolf 5.
Yeah, 5th edition of Werewolf, which there's some legitimate, arguments for and against that system. I think it's a really interesting thing. There was a nice conversation happening over there.
Yeah.
Um,
Links for that are in the show notes description. On your podcatcher or whatever of choice. And Werewolf is another. I wouldn't put it as a dream game, but Werewolf is the whole kind of. I don't even know what it is about it, but there's something in that I find more interesting for me than most of the other assorted of darkness games.
right? Yeah, that's an interesting game.
Other than maybe Hunter, I might find Hunter very interesting too.
Yeah, I keep him hawing around about I still want to play Vampire. I want to play Vampire because it's Vampire. And I know that does nothing for you. I know you're like,
I'm just not that into the whole actual vampire thing.
I understand that, but it's for me, it's kind of like this is I don't know. I just need to put the feather in my cap. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I'm not in any way poo-pooing anyone that wants to play it or loves to play it or any of that. I think most of my play experience with that system came at a time when I didn't understand what it was trying to do.
right.
And so that may have colored, a bit of my experience with it, but I was
Yeah.
also, that was at the late 90s, Interview with a Vampire had been huge, and there was the Aaron Spelling TV thing, and it was just like, really?
Yeah, I get it. You were oversaturated. Well, it's kind of like how I feel about like zombie media now.
Mhm.
I could care less for a zombie game, but if it came out, I'd be like, hey, that's cool. I'll check that out.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think that's where we sort of gonna be kind of a interesting conversation. I mean, I'd love to hear what other people think their like dream game to be.
Yeah.
Um,
And I wondered, like, for me, I feel like that sort of intrigue and action and, let's call it, dramatic tension, which could have horror elements, because I think the horror elements build dramatic tension incredibly well. I feel like those are things that try to shoot for a lot of the time when I'm running games. So I don't know how much difference, honestly, there is in that white whale of a game that I want to run is between, that and the one I want to play.
right, right.
Where you seem to have a much more defined line there, so to speak.
Well, you got to understand though. I mean, from my perspective, let me put it this way:
Mhm.
as a kid getting into tabletop RPGs and then growing into an adult that's into tabletop RPGs, I always wanted to play Cyberpunk. I read that book cover to cover for like years before we even met. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it was always like, it was my first obsession in tabletop RPGs. And so it has remained my obsession in tabletop RPGs.
That's fair.
And so that's why I'm like, my dream game is to get this long form, but like, I've always had that dream game. That's always been the case for me.
Mm-hmm.
As much as I'd like to sit down at the Critical Role table and play some D&D or whatever with them, whatever game they're running, I still, at the end of the day, would love to sit down and play Cyberpunk 2020, Cyberpunk Red, either one. Both are good. Probably 2020, but either way. And do it in a way, do it where it's a long form thing. And that's I play that weekly for, say, 3 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'd love that. But that's always been what I've wanted. I never wanted to play D&D for years and years and years and years and years.
There's a joke there, I think, but I sometimes wonder if anybody actually wants to play D&D for years and years and years, or if they just want to play, and D&D is the only thing they can get all agree on for years and years and years.
I've met a lot of people that are diehard Dungeons and Dragons fans. I've met a lot of people that are diehard Dungeons and Dragons fans, mainly because I run Dungeons and Dragons at a game store open to the public.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a game store that's particularly interested in tabletop RPGs. If I'm completely honest, I love my buddy Mario. He runs a great shop. He's not particularly interested in tabletop RPGs because we don't have a crowd that's interested in tabletop RPGs.
Mm-hmm.
So that all being said, I meet those people that are like, oh, Dungeons and Dragons. And it's like, well, what about another system? No, but Dungeons and Dragons. And those people jump ship to Pathfinder because Pathfinder was 3.75.
Mm-hmm.
And then those people jumped right back to 5th edition and brought new players to 5th edition. And that's why it got the boom it did. And if they fumble the ball with 1E or with 1, they're going to jump ship to whatever the next whatever the closest edition's going to be. That might be stay on 5. We saw that when 4 came out. A lot of people stayed on 3 and was like, we got 3.5 and I got Pathfinder supplements if I want stuff. I'm good.
Yeah.
And then 4, which is a really interesting system, but people stayed on 3. And it's kind of like Windows. Windows is the same way. Microsoft, when they put out a new version of Windows, everybody goes, I'm going to leave that over there. And the early adopters are going to jump right on it and be like, this is great, or this is terrible. And depending on what their response is, everybody else kind of goes, I'm going to stay right here, or I'm going to go ahead and move on. So.
But it's a whole lot easier to play an unsupported RPG than it is to use an unsupported operating system.
Yes and no. See, Windows, much like Dungeons and Dragons has in the past, it unsupported doesn't mean that it's not getting any kind of support. It just means that it's not the most recent version.
Fair. Well, that's a thought. Wow. I don't know. I've often felt like, at least for me, D&D was the game that a lot of times you settled on because it was like the common language.
Yeah, it's the stopgap game. It's the it's the stopgap. It's the, well, nobody else here knows anything else, and they're not really interested in learning anything else, so we'll just play some Dungeons and Dragons, and it'll be fine.
And it is for a lot of people it is, and good for them. I just end up bored somehow.
I don't disagree with you. The only thing I'll say for me is I actually am having a really good time playing D&D, but that's because I'm GMing it, not playing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the only way I'm keeping, and I don't mean this to be a dig, but it's the only way I'm keeping myself entertained is because I'm running it and not having other people run it for me.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting.
Because I kind of am making my own fun. Because when things start getting stale, things are getting stale. Okay, well then I guess I better change it up. Damn me, how dare I let that get stale?
Yeah, well,
You know what I'm saying?
right, but that's a thing about it that I hadn't necessarily considered, you know, and I don't know that there's a good way to evaluate it because I guess too, does it, is it a matter of the perspective you're looking at the story slash system from? Are you, you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like,
I think it's how you're interacting with the world that exists for Dungeons and Dragons. I think it's how you're interacting with the world of that particular session or that campaign. And that's interesting. I mean, it's one of those things where on a small scale, we both get really bored with it because as a character in that world, unless you're doing really high level like world encompassing things, you're going to sit there and be like, I don't care. I'm here to punch monsters.
mm-hmm.
You need me to steal a thing, I'll steal a thing for you. Like as a player, you're not thinking about the worldwide implications. However, as a GM, you do think about the worldwide implications, and then
Yeah.
you implicate you add those to what's going on. It's just a different perspective, and I think that's why I'm entertained running it and not completely bored.
Yeah, I haven't thought of it in that regard, but I think you've hit on something there where yeah, it could be a system that you find boring to play, but because you're running it in a strange way, you're more divorced from the system itself. Even though you kind of have to maintain the system, you're not as beholden to it,
Right.
I guess.
Right. Yeah, you're not you're making the rules. It's I'm sorry. I know that there are rules for the game. A lot of times I throw certain things just right out the window. I do not care that there is a carry weight on gold. I don't care. It doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter.
I mean,
Like I get why it's there and I get the balancing purposes. But at the same time, for me, in my game, they're not going to ever need to actually use that gold. Like they're going to use it, but they're not going to be like, "Oh man, we're really hurting for money." I've never really run a game that way. I
yeah.
like to do bigger, grandiose things. Now, I could see myself having a lot of fun really running them strapped for cash, but I would need a team of I would need at least 2 rogues. You know what I mean? Like it would have to be sort of a heist type game, but that's not the game I'm running right now.
Well,
Sorry.
no. That actually that okay, so let's follow that thought for a little bit here. So, let's say how do you without it becoming either monotonous or miserable? Because I think playing with the concept of scarcity, be it monetary or some other resource, is is a great thing, right? And then
Yeah,
but
no,
how do you continue to play with that without it either becoming, like I said, misery or monotony?
in my case, um so let's just focus on the gold and Tyler, if you're listening, you probably caught this, but it's fine. I have one of my players that listens to the podcast now, so it's kind of funny. I got to be careful about how I talk about the game. Anyway, in my case, I let them amass a ton of wealth, a ton of gold, diamonds, gems, and then brought them to an area where that meant nothing.
Mhm.
I basically went, okay, you guys left, you went to the astral plane. We established before you even left that time passes differently on the astral plane. You were gone for basically 100 years and come back to a world that is a paper money system that is I basically took them from I am transitioned them from a standard D&D campaign. They went spell jamming and then they came back and now it's Eberron.
Aha.
Uh so that's where that became. I was like, this is going to be fun for me. And I've had a really good time because I've just basically been like, well, screw you guys. You let me do whatever I want. I'm just going to run Eberron because that's what I want. Which isn't a problem because they're like, oh, it's still D&D, and which is great. It lets me tell my weird, dumb noir story while it also being still D&D. So they still get their, their fix. But yeah, I basically took all of the money and all of the wealth they'd accumulated and chucked it out the window. And when it's not really worth anything anymore. And now they're in a bind. They're like, we have no money. We keep skipping out on bar tabs. The guards are after us. And they're basically in their airship floating around the city trying to figure out what to do next. Because they did almost lose a fight to a bunch of guards. Because I threw a bunch of Warforged fighters at them. We don't talk about that. I just described them as Warforged. I let them figure out that they were like same as them level fighters. He's going to take his action surge. And they were like, he's going to do what now?
But so that, though, now that I'm thinking about it, I wonder, to some of that, do we choose to, and I guess maybe this ties into what I was talking about of kind of unknown and discovery, right? Do we choose to find, like you said, that gold has a carry weight as annoying because we're not, or let's say most of us, okay, yes, we've all seen, movies where suitcases of cash and whatever, briefcases of cash, but
we're too far removed from
most of us economy. In our reality are very far removed from the fact, or from a state where your amount of wealth is a physical task to transport.
Right. Yeah, I feel that. I think that's exactly, I think you're hitting on it. Well, because all my money is on a card. It weighs less than a pound. I don't have to think about how much my credit card weighs.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, okay, maybe I do, like you said, maybe it is some of that, like, okay, well, I don't want to have to think about this because I don't think about this in real life, so I have no way of contextualizing it. Mm-hmm. Simultaneously, I don't know. I feel like it's just another hurdle for somebody to jump. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. It's just another dumb setback that I don't feel is absolutely necessary to tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like it's absolutely necessary to know that my player has 340 pounds of gold on them, even though they can't lift it. It's not absolutely necessary because the bigger scheme of things, so maybe it's a world philosophy thing for me or whatever, but like, to me, it's not about how much money you have. It's about what you do with it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so for my players, I'm like, all right, you have $18 bajillion. That's great. What are you going to do with it? What do you, are you going to help the orphanage, or are you going to, steal the orphanage? Like, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
And that's more so about where I think the fun comes in for that game for me. But again, it's also a worldview thing. It's also that, like, and I'm not imposing that on anyone. I don't care what you do with your fake money in this imaginary game we're playing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's more about, like, for me, fake money in a game we're playing doesn't mean nothing if I don't have a story to go with it.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Like, if I didn't fight the dragon in the dragon's horde and then swoop my bag of holding through before we dipped, that don't mean nothing. Like, I found this 8,000 gold in that guy's pocket. Like, okay, well, you just murdered that dude and stole his money.
Yeah.
Good for you. You know what I'm saying? Like,
mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe I'm not making a ton of sense, but
no,
I felt like it was.
I get it. Like, but it is, and I wonder if some of it is that we kind of struggle with that because we, short of, going to the coin op laundromat, how often are you carrying a volume of physical money that's, because even in modern paper currency,
even paper bills, yeah. Paper bills don't start getting heavy until you're multiple thousands of dollars.
Mm-hmm. You know, and well, I guess, you know, now probably coin op laundromats are probably all running on your debit card or credit card
Pretty
or whatever.
much.
But
As I had to use one for a little while, and it was yeah, you walked in, they gave you a little like a frequent flyer card,
mm-hmm.
and you loaded that with the money you wanted to use for you loaded that for the money you wanted to use for the laundromat, and that was that. That was it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's an interesting thing because that is something that I've occasionally mentally struggled with is and look, I do it as a player too, right? Where you have this gear that you keep writing down and I didn't remember I had that. You know what I mean?
Right.
And did you ever see the Mythbusters episode where they did that?
Did what?
They were it was a Mythbusters episode, and it was specifically it might have even been Doom that they were talking about, but it was something, you know, one of the, you know, first person shooter video games, and basically, can you carry all the different guns with you, or do the guns start weighing you down? Yeah, Mythbusters actually did an episode about that.
I don't think I ever saw that. I'll have to try and find it. Sure, it's on
I want to say
HBO
it
at
was
this point.
the later several seasons.
Okay. All right. That sounds fine.
And it might even have been just like video game myths or something, because I remember them doing a thing because it would have been about the same time that Fruit Ninja was popular.
Oh, they did like a Fruit Ninja. I remember that.
I think it was
I didn't
the same
remember the gun
episode.
thing. Yeah. Huh. Well, do you have any final thoughts on this subject?
I don't know. We kind of rambled a little bit, but I'd be curious to hear what everybody out there's dream games would be, you know, and just like I'm not throwing any shade at anyone for whatever they would be or how they want to say it, because
No.
I mean, you heard between us, you went very system specific, where I'm more big concepts and themes.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and I'd be curious too. Is it, you know, is your dream game different as a player than as a GM? You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I would my dream game as a GM or as a player? You mean
Well, no,
sorry.
I'm just saying, like,
general.
in the grand scheme of things, not necessarily you specifically, because you kind of hinted that, yeah, they are and they aren't.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I think I've said most of what I thought.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much my thoughts on it. So let's go ahead and move into game of the week.
Woohoo! Game of the week.
Game of the week. Game of the week.
All right, who's going first?
I can go first. I have technically two. One's an honorable mention, and then one's a serious thing.
Okay.
The honorable mention is for those of you that did not back the Kickstarter. Old Gods of Appalachia is out. Go get it. It's on drive-thru. Looks awesome.
Oh, that's right. I got an email that I have to. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, get it. The second thing is also thanks to the guy that plays in my game, Tyler. Calling you out, buddy. Beak, Feather, and Bone is a cooperative role-playing game. It's a world-building tool as well as a competitive map labeling RPG. So in physical form, this game is amazing. You and he did it with one other person, but you could do it with, I think, a handful. Sit down and work your way through a 52 card deck, and you describe the beak, which is the reputation, the feather, the appearance, and the bone, interior of buildings, as you narrate who inhabitants emerges and make NPCs for just a map on like a pre-made map. And each time it's a little different because each time, you know, you shuffle the deck of cards and it's a different experience. And it's just a really neat, really cool game.
That does sound really interesting.
It's all of $5 on drive-thru RPG. However, there is, and I don't know how to get it, there is a box that has basically all of their games. All of the, not all of the Possible Worlds games, but a bunch of those little notebook-sized TTRPGs that they've made.
Okay.
And Tyler picked that up, and it was really awesome. and looking over what they did with Beak, Feather, and Bone got me into it. And I actually picked up a copy on drive-through, and I'm going to run myself through that at some point because it has variants for solo play, and just see what comes out. But it's just a really neat thing.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
But that is mine.
All right. Well, I'm going to go with something that came out last year. And that's a game called Alter Ego Mania.
Oh, I looked at this. It's a really cool game.
This is from Pelgrane Press, based in the Gumshoe system, but it's specifically part of their 1-to-1 line, which is designed for one player, one GM. And just to read their tagline for it, it says, "The skies above New Olympus are patrolled by Cape Crusaders, but these superior beings are far from heroes. They wield their powers with reckless disregard, serving the interests of corporate overseers and silencing those who oppose their will. You are Clara Koenig, investigative journalist for The Pedestrian, a newspaper, and you intend to prove that the privileged superhuman elite do not yet hold a monopoly on justice." Sounds really, really fun. If I'm not mistaken, this was at least originally released exclusively in PDF, which will set you back $15.
That's a Hertz donut.
But
I'm kidding.
Yeah, but I mean, like, I don't know. At the same point, you can get it anywhere. Does say it comes with a bunch of printable problem and edge cards. Starter adventure. I'm sure you can change. I kind of like the idea of the setting just to see. It's interesting. I don't know that. I mean, I might pick it up. Other than I have a huge pile of stuff like we talked about earlier, but it's very intriguing. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's a really. I looked at that. It looks really cool. It's very intriguing.
The one-on-one aspect of it is also really intriguing. I'm sure you could kind of disassemble it and figure out a way to use it as inspiration for a not one-on-one game. But yeah, so I think, like I said, that's called Alter Ego Mania. It's all one word. Like usual, there'll be links for everything down in the show notes. Game of the week, etc. Links for PGX, which will be at end of September, beginning of October.
Before too long.
Yeah, it'll be here before we know it. What else? I should actually get another Patreon episode dropped by the time this one is released.
Ooh.
I actually got it
fancy
put together. I just didn't get it put in the places where it needs to be to go to Patreon people. But thank you to you people anyway. What else?
I think it's everything. D20 Network as always. And we want to remind everyone to be kind to one another and get out there and play some RPGs.
Yep. Take care, y'all.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter and RPGs. Find us on Facebook at Me and Steve RPG Podcast, on Discord at Me and Steve RPGs, and as always, all of these links are in the show notes. Thank you, and be kind to one another.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.
In 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to Me and Steve Talk RPGs. Let me try that again without the mic squeak.